All right, welcome everyone to ARCI's virtual forum number 31. It's the 21st of September in 2024, and I'm very pleased to welcome all of you from not just ARCI, but all the other clubs around the country. It's a beautiful day here in Northern Illinois, a little bit on the warm side, but it's not raining, and it's, as somebody said, it's good outdoor Hamfest weather. So today I'd like to talk about our agenda that you can see in front of you there. It's we got 5 great presentations lined up, and it's great to have these people doing presentations for us. And I always like to plug the presenters and give them some accolades for doing that. And I like to invite all of you to be presenters. So please think about something you could present and contact us and be a presenter. So after we do our presentations, we'll do a quick show and tell section, which is people that just want to show some quick little thing they learned or have. And we usually show a poll here to ask you if you have a show and tell. And then after we do the show and tells, Tom will talk about what happened at Radio Fest this summer, and he'll talk about our next swap meet. And then we'll do an items wanted, items for sale, and then wrap it up with an open session if we have time. So before I introduce the first presenter, I'll just briefly talk about the meeting protocol, which all of you know anyway. It's basically stay on mute unless you have a question. And I'll also point out that we have one more virtual forum planned for this year on November 16th. And as always, we record these and we edit them and they get put on our YouTube channel. So check it out. So our first presenter is Brian Belanger, and he has graciously offered at the very last minute to be a presenter because we had a cancellation. And we really appreciate that, Brian. And as always, we see a very excellent presentation. Today, he's going to talk about vacuum tubes. His title is All About Getters, Vacuuming Out Vacuum Tubes. So, Brian, let's get on with it.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Let me put in a little quick commercial before I start. If any of you are planning on being out on the East Coast on October 20th, there's going to be a terrific auction. The Mid-Atlantic Antique Radio Club is having our big event called Fall Fest on Sunday the 20th. We're going to have a huge auction, lots of interesting vintage ham equipment. We have things like a E.F. Johnson Viking 2 and a Thunderbolt in very good condition. We have things like a Heathkit Marauder, Mohawk. We have some Drake equipment. We have an Atwater Kent breadboard in mint condition and lots of other stuff. So if you're going to be anywhere in the area, please stop in. You can check our website for directions, maarc.org. Okay, well, the topic this morning is getters, and this kind of goes back to my start as an antique radio collector, which now is about 50 years ago. When I first started looking at antique radios, I noticed if you take a typical 5-tube TRF battery set, I made the observation that the 2 RF tubes, typically O1As, would have this silver coating on the glass. And the 2 audio amplifier tubes, usually also O1As, would have a silver coating, but the detector tube, which is often, say, a 200A, would not. And so I asked some of my friends, why is that? And one of my friends said, well, it has to do with the way they were gettered. And I said, what's a getter? Anyway, I started trying to read up on that, and there's not a whole lot of information available about getters. Tyne's book, Saga the Vacuum Tube, and some of the others discuss it briefly, but over the years, I've been kind of paying attention and trying to learn as much as I can. So we'll talk about this morning, and some of you in the audience probably will have other things you can add to it. So what's a getter? Well, it's something you put into a vacuum tube to get rid of the residual gases, to get or trap any gas molecules that the evacuation process fails to remove. And there are a lot of different materials that have been used over the years for getters. Here's a list of some of them. Magnesium is one we often see in the older tubes that have that silver coating on them. But some of these others have been used too. Barium is used in some of the more modern tubes. Strontium is a pretty good getter, but it's more expensive, so it's not used very often. But of course, not all vacuum tubes are evacuated, or I should say, not all radio tubes are evacuated. The Tungerbob rectifiers were not. The early detector tubes like the OOA, and then later tubes like the OZ4 and OB2, they contain gas. And if you've ever looked at an 866 rectifier, you notice there's little tiny droplets of mercury you can see on the glass. And of course, they have mercury vapor in them. So we sometimes refer to all of these as vacuum tubes, but not all of them have vacuum inside. In the case of the UX 200 and 200A, the 200 typically used argon gas and the 200A cesium vapor. When Lee DeForest came up with his first Audion tube, he was convinced that it needed to have gas in it in order to work properly. So, of course, it was not highly evacuated. And when DeForest came up with this invention, he really didn't understand the physics of it all that well. And I always say that the credit really should go to the General Electric labs and to the Bell Telephone labs, because those scientists and engineers really studied vacuum tubes, really tried to understand the physics of how they work. And so a lot of the credit for developing advances in vacuum tubes really should go to GE and to Bell Labs. So if you're trying to make a high vacuum tube for an amplifier, you try to connect it up to a vacuum pump before you seal it and get as much air out as you can. And one way to help that along is to heat it. So while you're pumping with the vacuum pump, you try to heat the tube as high as you can without melting the glass. And that helps to remove any of these gas molecules that are typically in there. Often in the 300 to 500 C is sort of the range that you use to try to bake it out and get those last molecules out to the best of your ability. And then to heat up the metal parts inside, they frequently use RF induction heating so that you can get the metal parts even hotter. And then if you have a getter in it, you may have to use that to flash the getter. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And some gases are worse than others. Of course, you start with a thing full of air, and oxygen is particularly bad. It tends to oxidize the cathode, and so you don't want that. But even inert gases, like if there's some argon or helium or something like that, that can create ions, which can cause a problem on the space charge. And it's hard to find a getter that works equally well for all gas molecules, so there's always compromises there. And like anything else with engineering, cost is important. So when choosing a getter, one of the big elements is how much is it going to cost and affect the price of the vacuum tube. You have to remember that back at the beginning of the 20th century, when people first started making vacuum tubes, the vacuum pumps they had in those days were not very good. Later, they came up with mercury diffusion pumps and cryogenic chambers and stuff like that. So as time went on, as years went by, the vacuum pumps got better and better. Another problem in the early days is they didn't have very good vacuum gauges. So if you were trying to measure what degree of vacuum you had achieved, it was not always easy to get a vacuum gauge that was accurate. And of course, in the early days, the seals were not that good. And so even if you had a high vacuum when the tube was built, in some cases, a slow leak over a period of time would gradually make the tube gassy. Now, as I said, it's not that easy to find information about getters. It's a highly proprietary technology. Each company had their own trade secrets. And if you'll find a few patents about gettering, but not that many, because I think in many cases, rather than file a patent and alert its competitors to what they were doing, the companies would sort of just keep it as a trade secret when they found something that would work well. So the earliest tubes, of course, did not use getters. Fleming's diode valve, which is kind of the first important vacuum tube, um, did not have getters, but he specified that you wanted to pump it out as best you could, get the highest possible vacuum. As I mentioned, DeForest's Audion had residual gas in it, so that did not have any getters. And even the Western Electric VT1, a very famous early vacuum tube, at least the ones that I've looked at, did not have getters. But it wasn't really until about the time of World War I that the scientists and engineers really began to understand what went on inside a vacuum tube. And as they understood more and more, they began to appreciate the fact that a getter might be a useful thing to have. I try to track down who was the first person to use a getter, and it's a little hard to track down, but according to Gerald Tyne, GE, around the time of 1718, World War II era, was beginning to experiment with getters. But of course, GE was a lot more knowledgeable than most of the other smaller companies that were making vacuum tubes. A little interesting tidbit, apparently this guy Round in England who was making vacuum tubes at one time had put a hunk of asbestos in the tip of the tube that you could heat it with a match to presumably to increase the amount of gas. And I think that must have been just kind of as an experimental thing to maybe to experiment with, how the gas affected the performance of the tube. So it wasn't until the early 20s when it became more common to find getters in tubes. And in particular, GE began to use the thoriated tungsten filaments for things like O1As. And those filaments were adversely affected by gas more so than the filaments used before the thoriated tungsten. So it became more important then to have good getters in the tube. If you look at the early Westinghouse tubes, like some of the early brass-based WD11s, WD12s, you won't find a getter in those, but the later ones, like this one shown here, has a lime getter, and a little arrow is pointing. What they would do is they would get a paste of lime and just sort of paint a strip of lime right onto the glass support there. And so if you look at a lot of different WD11s, some of them may have a lime getter and some of them may not. Here's a pretty tube. General Electric had two light bulb factories that started making tubes. There was the Harrison, New Jersey factory, which eventually got taken over by RCA. And they had a plant near Cleveland, the Nella Park plant. And the one in Cleveland used red phosphorus as a getter in the early 20s. And these tubes are sometimes called rainbow tubes. Sometimes they have a gold color, sometimes more of a magenta color. But radio collectors love these tubes because they look so pretty when you look at them. So if you get one of these, it's got a red phosphorus getter. And here's a more typical magnesium type getter at the Harrison, New Jersey factory. The GE tubes that were made there generally had magnesium getters. Okay, now of course you come across these blue tubes made by Arcturus and Bryson, but of course that had nothing to do with a getter. The color was just a colored glass, which made it look a little prettier, but it had no effect on the tube performance. So you hear people talking about hard tubes versus soft tubes. So the O1As that are very common, they were often called hard tubes, high vacuum, whereas the detector tubes, the OOAs, were soft tubes because they had some gas. And sometimes you hear people talking about keepers. So a getter is put in the tube to get rid of the residual gas during the manufacturing operation, but many of these getters continue to absorb any gas molecules that come off during the life of the tube, and in that role, it's sometimes called a keeper. So how do you get the getter? To work inside the tube? Well, if it's one of those old lime getters, you just stick it in the tube and evacuate it and seal it, and the lime soaks up the gas molecules. If you're using something like a magnesium getter, you have to flash it. You have to vaporize the magnesium through some means of rapid heating at the time that you're doing the evacuation. And if you looked at a lot of these old tubes, some of the magnesium getters pretty much cover the entire glass so you can hardly see anything inside, whereas other tubes, the getter, the silver looking area, that's just a very small area. So it depends on the tube and the manufacturing process. If you go to YouTube, you actually find a couple of videos there about getter flashing that you can watch. Here's one example. So in receiving tubes, the getter is more often than not attached to the plate, whereas in transmitting tubes, it's very often a separate electrode. But you have to be very careful in flashing the getter so that you don't, especially if it's something like magnesium, which has got some conductivity, you don't want to deposit it so that it causes a short circuit. So while it's somewhat of a science, it's also somewhat of an art in designing tubes with getters so that when you flash the getter, you don't cause any short circuits. And another problem is with transmitting tubes, if you cover the glass completely with the getter, it tends to reflect the heat back into the tube, and the transmitting tubes get hot. So you typically don't find a transmitting tube with a getter that completely covers the glass. Here's a close-up of a little miniature tube. There are different styles of getters that you find. Some are called D-shape, like the one in the picture here is a D-shape. Some call a halo, just like a circular halo, and there are other types too. Here's one in a type 80, that little sort of pellet-looking thing that's attached to the support there is the getter. Here's another close-up of a miniature tube, and you often see the gettering material up at the top of the tube, like on the one there. And in this case, it's one of those halo-type getters. And so that would be done with RF heating. What you do is you'd design a coil that you would bring up with a lot of turns. You'd bring up close to the tube and give it a zap. And of course, the little circle there acts like a one-turn secondary with more amperage, and so it gets hot enough that it flashes the getter. So what about a metal tube? Well, you can't use RF heating with a metal tube, so they had to develop a new technique for metal tubes. And what is normally done there is you have a little, like a trough, a V-shaped trough of tantalum or nickel connected between the metal envelope and the ground pin. And you fill that with various barium compounds. And after the tube is all sealed and that, you zap a high current through that trough, which causes the barium to react and to form free barium to therefore form the getter. Okay, well, if you ever come across a tube that looks like this with a little bit of a white coating in it, that white coating is not the getter. That generally means there's been air leakage. And even though the tube might still have a good filament and all that, if you were to test it for gas and you saw that little white coating, chances are it would test as a very gassy tube. So I'm going to stop at this point. It's kind of a short presentation this morning, but I'll certainly do my best to try to answer any questions. And maybe some of you who've had experience with this can add some things to what I said.
If I was sharp enough today, which I'm not, I've got a whole series of lantern slides from the DeForest factory in 1927-28 that are beautiful high-resolution pictures of their vacuum tube manufacture. But I guess that'll have to be for another time then to show those. But
Robert, I would suggest that you try to get those slides digitized and prepare an article either for the ARCI Journal or for the Mid-Atlantic Club Journal. We'd love to have that information.
yeah, they're already in digital form, and we found those in we were cleaning out an estate in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and in the middle of July, and there was an attic space, and people didn't even want to pull down the stairs there. They said, "Oh no, we're not going up there," and I said, "I gotta find out what's up there," and we found treasures up there. Lots of prototype vacuum tubes that had been saved, and at the estate sale, we realized over $10,000 in just the stuff in the attic. And it was a wonderful experience, even though it was physically incredibly taxing to get up there. But fortunately, we saved most of the documentation that's up there.
A little addition to the thing on the gassy tubes, because I like to in the QSTs, they always have lists of 50, 25, 70, umpteen years ago. And I dig through QST archives and I ran across a early to mid 20s discussion on detectors. And the theory back then was that gassy tubes made better detectors. So they wanted gassy tubes for detectors back then. So yeah, I found evidence that was actually a firm belief. That's probably why you find most of those are gassy. The general theory was that they worked better as a detector.
They did offer some advantage. The biggest problem with them is that with just very small changes in filament temperature, the advantage would go away. And you'll find a number of those sets that were designed to use the soft tubes. They'll have an extra vernier resistance in the filament control, so you can make those very fine adjustments in filament temperature. But most of the time, especially in the United States, where vacuum tubes are relatively cheap compared to Europe, for instance, is that it was a whole lot easier to just add another stage of RF amplification and not so worry so much about extreme sensitivity in the detector.
Yeah, a lot of the articles, the discussions, they had controls on almost every element in the sets, and it was quite a project, twiddling and tweaking and getting them to play right. And yeah, a lot of that going on in those days until they started to really learn what was going on inside those things.
More questions?
Absolutely fascinating talk, Brian. Thank you very much for that. I'm wondering, we back off to real basics, and am I correct in believing that the primary purpose of a vacuum in a tube is to preserve the filament?
Well, of course, when you have some gas in the tube, it affects the characteristic curve, and so if you're trying to get high amplification, the general rule of thumb is you want to get a very high degree of vacuum to affect the shape of the characteristics to give you more gain.
Okay, so I had always believed that the vacuum was basically to keep the filament from burning out, and maybe there's much more to it than I had realized. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Brian, that was fascinating and very informative. I learned quite a bit in those slides, and I really appreciate that. Are there any other questions? Yeah, that was awesome to learn about that stuff. Appreciate that very much. Thanks. All right, our next presentation is from Tom Kleinschmidt, and Tom is always coming across lots of paper in his ARCI duties, and today he's going to talk about some of the little booklets that you occasionally see at our swap meets, and he's collected a few of those, and today he'll talk about that. Tom?
All right. This is just kind of a quick informational thing. It's not going to be a ton of depth, but a lot of people ask about learning about radio and learning how to repair radio, and the amount of information that was printed back in the day was huge, and we're going to talk about that a bit. So we'll first off, the booklets, I'm just going to show you a smattering. Obviously, there's a zillion of them out there, but basically there was two different audiences, whether it's the end user or whether it's the repair people. And they covered a variety of topics. And you can see here, we talk about education and service support and how to do it and troubleshooting and so on. And of course, publishers are trying to get their name out there all the time, and it gave them an opportunity to do some advertising and get some more revenue. So here's just a smattering of people that did put out a fair number of booklets. Everybody's aware of Gernsback. We're going to talk about him a bunch later, and John Ryder and Howard Sams post-war, and RCA and Sylvania, and then if we get into the retailers, Allied put out a ton of stuff. Radio Shack did after them, and then equipment manufacturers, which we're not going to get into today, but General Radio had a monthly publication that they sent out to their customers with kind of hints and tips. And I know Hewlett Packard did things like that as well. It was not on here. And at Hammerland, I've got some stuff, and you've all seen these things. I mean, this is all things that all of us that have been in the hobby for a long time, there's always piles of this stuff around, and it seems to go begging. And in reality, it's pretty useful. So let's talk about Sylvania. I've been running across these little guys. They're only 4.5 by 6 inches, so they're pocket-sized books. And the names are subtly different. If you take a look at the top, it says service hints, and then they get into radio circuits and radio tubes and radio equipment. And but they all had a different use. So the service hints was a troubleshoot by the radio model. So if you had a Zenith, 6S37, which is probably not a real number, say, hey, by the way, the oscillator circuit has this issue, look over here. The circuit hints is more theory of operation and weird problems that circuits in general might display. So again, those things are tied to the service professional. Radio tube hints gets a little bit more into the theory of operation of tubes. They also talk about specific tube types where they say, okay, here's a pentode and here's what it does, and here's a converter tube and here's what it does. And then they also, again, have some kind of tricks and hints about that particular genre of tube and what it does. Equipment hints is about test gear, so VTVMs mostly in this particular one. And then the auto radio installation, there's a series of 3 here, and they're just actually in date sequence. And I think this, I think 1936, 1937, I think the first one's 34. And they were made for direct mail. On the back side, they've got the return address. And if you can see this little white tab, that's actually the mailing label folded over the edge with the address on the other side. So that's Sylvania's deal. And then in the back, they're, of course, promoting themselves and promoting their brand and helping you with your repair business. So you can get business forms. And in this case, we're talking anything from an invoice to a tracking your customer to stationaries. So you can write letters to people, but it all, of course, says Sylvania on it. And then it keeps going with the manuals we all see, especially things like this technical manual. They sold a bunch of them, and of course, they're still promoting the service hints here. And if you want to draw some schematics, you can get a template, but it says Sylvania on it, so you can see how that's going. And then now that you're out in the field, you can get the sticker on the tube that says you test it. You can put your call me when it's got to be repaired. And by the way, we'll happily sell you a smock or a coat, but guess what? It's going to say Sylvania on it. I'm sure these weren't huge money makers, but they're more important from a marketing viewpoint. So the whole promotion, keep your name out there, brand loyalty thing's a big deal. So they also had some useful information in one of the books, which was a tube interchangeability guide. And most of them aren't interchangeable, which is sort of fun. I mean, you do find this 58AS is a 66, but mostly it'll say you've got a 78. Well, you can replace it with a 78. So all you're really learning is a detector amplifier if you didn't already know that. And there's like half a dozen pages of these things. I just kind of put the highlights up here. So now let's go to Mr. Gernsback. As you know, he just was a nut for publishing magazines. This is a list of magazines I pulled off of Wikipedia. And they didn't just touch on electronics. He got into, I'll call it social things, like a thing like Life Guide and French humor. And of course, as you may know, he was a big science fiction writer, so a bunch of stuff is in science fiction genre. But the things that are highlighted there are the ones you run across at radio meets and ham fests and estate sales and stuff all the time. Radiocraft, radio news probably being the most prolific, and then of course post-war radio electronics. But in addition to magazines, he was a pamphlet guy too. So here is another set of pocket pamphlets that are about the same size as those ones from Sylvania. This was a 10 booklet series. They made a point of telling you that in the back of it. And they called it the Gernsback Educational Library. And of course, they're numbered. And they're cheap, 10 cents. And leverage some advertising on the back. You can see National Radio Institutes on the back of most of these ones I have here. So that was a paid advertiser, probably, and also a paid advertiser in other magazines. So it just was another extension. Interesting thing is these things got published over time. So you can see that Radio Publications was the entity that they used. And if you look at Gernsback things, he had a zillion different brands of publications, not the publication itself, but the publisher. So in this case, Radio Publications is the publisher, even though it says Gernsback on the top. And there's 3 different addresses in New York. Obviously, they moved over time. So, but the copyrights are the same on all these. So there you are, just for more trivia for that side of life. So they made some larger books and something on the order of 129 numbered copies, and they stopped numbering them and had some more after that. A lot of this stuff is in World Radio History online. And again, they are what they say they are, except that obviously a pocket radio guide that's 6x9, you better have a pretty big pocket. This one says Gernsback publication down here, and this says Rad Craft, which I guess is a play on Radiocraft. So again, now we've got 3 different publishing genres. And of course, to look more modern in the 40s than in the 30s and early 40s, they updated the way the front of the book looked. And they are what you think they are. And from the viewpoint, I'm not going to get into the context. I didn't want to bore you guys to tears. But a lot of these things are recycling articles out of magazines and bundling them by topic. And some stuff is freshly written. So here's a couple of other examples. This one's kind of a misnomer. It says Radio Data Book. That one definitely is mostly magazine articles, and they have some data in it. Like mileage between 2 towns, it's almost like having an almanac. Station call letters, some tube specs. But the bulk of the magazine, or I should say the booklet, is regarding do-it-yourself, how to build stuff. Same with the shortwave receiver ones. And again, if you look, it says published by Radio News and Shortwave Radio here, and it says published by Shortwave Craft. So, and different addresses because, maybe the police were chasing them, who knows. But these things are all over and they're dirt cheap. And if you don't want to deal with dirt, you can just go right here to the worldradiohistory.com, and there is just an endless amount. If you search under Allied or Gernsback or the Sylvania ones weren't on there. Sylvania did have a newsletter that they put out monthly, but these particular little booklets weren't in there. But anyway, I kind of geek out on this stuff, but I also didn't want to bore you guys to death. So that's what I got.
Well, thank you, Tom. Not boring at all. Really appreciate that. That was a great presentation. Questions for Tom?
Yeah, Tom, I'm wondering whether World Radio has facilities for digitizing, and if you had something pretty good, would you, if you sent it to them, would they digitize it and put it on their site?
I think it's the other way around. I think you digitize it and send it to them. But
Yeah.
I have talked with the fellow on that site via email because I discovered on one of their rider manuals, I was sending someone a link because they needed something in the supplemental section in the very back. And the page that he needed was the exact last page of that volume, and it was missing on their website. So I sent them a scan of my last page so they could add it in, and I'm not sure if they did or not. But the guy that runs it's a really nice guy. And I encourage you to contact him, and because he may be able to facilitate getting them scanned if you can't.
Yeah, Gleason does. I've sent him uh, uh a 3-inch tall stack of rare magazines, and he promptly gets them scanned, professionally scanned, and returns them promptly. So if you have any rare materials, let him know. He's very eager to build the site. The main thing, I see your radio news there, but what I'm really concerned about is that's such a fantastic resource. I hope he has plans to perpetuate it past his, his own demise, and because it's just wonderful.
Yeah, this is a 282-page radio news compendium of World War II military equipment, and it's just an amazing thing. I'd love to see it digitized and on the web, but that's a lot of pages.
Well, have you looked at that site? It may actually be on there.
Say again?
I said he may already have that on the site.
Oh,
he has a lot
okay.
of common magazines already on there, and obviously based on Robert's comment, he will digitize things. So I would encourage you to contact him, because our whole mission here is to preserve the history, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, it's now called worldradiohistory.com. I think he's done all the radio news, but just go to the site and you'll know immediately whether he has it or not.
Okay. Any other questions for Tom on his booklet presentation? Well, Tom, thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
Okay, our next presenter, Ed Schumacher, is going to talk about some radios that his grandfather used. And so they're a big part of his family, and I'll let him proceed.
Yes, this is built around a radio that has been in my family all these years, so it's not like a pickup collected. The speaker that I'm addressing today, though, was acquired from another ham operator. It's not the original one, but it is the same one that my grandfather originally had. So if we can go to our first slide, this is sitting, well, the radio resides right outside the door to my office here in the upstairs hallway. It's a Graybar 330, floor standing. This is with the correct original type speakers sitting on top of it. The only way I can work the radio, you'll notice the front panel is off. Sad story, years ago when I took it out of the basement before my grandmother moved, the cabinet was in rough shape. In the 70s, I only knew about furniture refinishing, not radios. And there was corrosion. These had a very specialized hinge on that front drop-down panel. Well, I took them to the place I was working at. A fellow there said, I have a friend who's got a plating business. He took the hinges, and a few days later, I noticed I hadn't seen him around. The guy quit the next day, and my hinges were gone forever because I had no name, no way to contact him, nothing. So at this time, when I want to operate the radio, I just pop the front panel off of the two spring detents that hold it in place. This is with the panel in place. It's a nice looking radio. I did a nice furniture version of refinish on the cabinet, completely clean, stripped. It was in rough shape, stained, nice varnish, looks nice, but it's probably not an authentic type finish. And this is how it looks right now with the Western Electric speaking telephone on top is a close-up of the escutcheon Graybar 330 super heterodyne. And as you can see, it's a plain plywood panel. I think it probably was originally stained darker so you wouldn't have seen the wood pattern. This was purchased in 1929 by my grandfather, George W. Emerson, at the old Western Electric store. He worked at the Western Electric Hawthorne Works. In 1929, he was somehow very lucky. My mom just mentioned once that he cashed all his stocks and bought hard goods, china, furniture, various items before the crash. And he stayed employed all the years during the Depression. He stayed employed at Western Electric, so he was very fortunate. Mandatory look inside the radio. It is, except for dusting and wiping down, in original condition. All the cloth wiring, nothing has been deoxided or anything yet. The power supply originally had suffered a short circuit. Found a guy right in Berwyn who was able to locally find a absolutely correct Graybar power supply with the brown paint, everything on it. He plugged it all together and the radio played. Next slide will show you a sort of a long view of it. That's how it looks inside. The interior, I did not clean and refinish that, but you can see it's very dark. Again, everything in there is all its original wiring, and a lot of the tubes are the ones that were in it when I hauled it up out of the basement. I think there have only been one or two replacements outside of the power supply in all the years I've had it. It uses number 27s and a pair of 71As for the audio. Here's an original, and this is an original 1929 little tiny photo. Shows it in the parlor of, I believe it may have been either a rented home or apartment over in Cicero. The photo is marked on the back, Christmas of 1929, showing the original speaker sitting on top of it. He later picked up an RCA mantle clock style, and that's what was with it when I found the set. Again, my mom mentioned that he had gotten tired of continually having to loosen the set screw and retweak the cone as temperature and humidity changed. Another interesting item right above that speaker, you would see a mirror. That mirror found its way down through the family to me again, and it now hangs in our living room above a vintage buffet. But yeah, a couple of items that were what he cashed in and bought before the market crashed. I have played the radio originally with the RCA, and then later, after I acquired the Western Electric speaker, and the first time I plugged it in, Chuck Shaden still had a nighttime program, I think on WBBM. So it was on AM, and they had just gotten a remastered recording of the Hindenburg crash. They had found, knowing who the announcers were and matching voices, that everyone had been playing those recordings at the wrong speed. This was a new remaster played at the correct speed. So I really wanted to hear it. Had the speaker sitting on the floor next to the radio. And all of a sudden I realized I'm clearly hearing German being spoken behind them and realized it was the Nazi agents who were there and who would eventually be in pursuit of the WLS people who were there doing the original wiring recording. I'd never been able to pick that out of the background noise on any other set I've listened to. So the presence out of this speaking telephone is nothing short of amazing. I've ended up with 2 copies of the instruction book for this speaker, and the following slides will show you the whole run of pages, just to give you a general idea of how thorough it was. But when this other fellow got the speaker, it was still in the crumbling remains of its original box, had the speakers, found in the attic of a building. 2 other members of the club, brothers, had a radio TV business for obviously a long time if they had this speaker still in inventory. And when they closed out, Bob went over there and he went up to the attic and found this thing and just brought it home because it was old. And when he found out that I had a radio that originally used it, the deal was made. So the next slides will just walk through the number 560 type loud speaking telephone, instructions for use, and they really are instructions. They start out, and there's no legalese boilerplate like don't use this in the bathtub or anything like that. It is all information about the speaker, information on replacing the cone, replacing the cord. There are 3 different styles depending on which cord and tips you wanted. Everything spelled out and step by step how to do the replacement. The cone thing is especially interesting. I think that's the one that shows a lot of steps. And they show views, the one interesting thing, and then they go into connecting it and using it on various types of equipment. They go into discussion of some of the characteristics of amplifiers and their ability to reproduce sounds properly. And the back page even has a very detailed, and I didn't copy that, it didn't look like it would copy well, but a whole list of places worldwide where these are handled. You can get parts, all kinds of things. It's just amazing. The one thing that was interesting, though, is no mention of speaker impedance. They weren't concerned with it in those days. They just said you can use it on any type of apparatus that can use a cone type speaker. So anyone who might be interested, I'll sort of put this out there. If you need a good copy of this or a research or something, I will do what I can to get a good clear scan of it. Best way to reach me is through my amateur radio call, WA9GQK at ARRL.net. And if you really might need this for research or something, I would do my best to work up a good, clean, readable scan of it and send it off to you. But other than that, this is my story, and I'm glad to say that at 95 years old, it still would actually play, but I keep the speaker out of harm's way most of the time. And if I turn on the radio, it's with the RCA, which will do passable. So that's it. Just interesting because this is a set that actually has been in my family all these years, and have the complete set as it was originally. And if there's ever anything good to listen to on AM again, maybe we'll have it on more regularly.
All right, thank you, Ed. That was pretty touching to see something from your family be presented. I always like those family history presentations where the radio has been around for a long time in the family. Do we have questions for Ed?
Yeah, thank you, Ed. That was fascinating. I'm wondering how you adjust the cone for different humidity situations. Do you play music into it and then adjust it until the music sounds good, or is there some other technique?
Well, when you if you are doing a replacement, they give you all the steps to get everything set so it's not vibrating or out of line. Once you've aligned the main assembly, after that, theoretically, all you have to do is on the front center of the cone, where the little metal rod sticks out from the telephone apparatus, there's a little set screw. You just loosen it, let the cone slide in or out so that it's at rest, and then gently tighten it again, and you should be good. Unless somebody bangs into it or you've done a complete replacement. But yes, they do give very detailed instructions on alignment, and if it starts to buzz, they tell you all about loosening the ring of screws on the back. Everything is in that booklet.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess a couple. One is, why does it have 3 wires on it, not 2? And what's internally happening, the mechanism inside that versus a regular cone speaker?
Okay, actually, there are only 2 wires. That third, what looks like a lead there, is just the cloth tail off of the covering. And the internal mechanism is probably comparable, because they do call it a speaking telephone. It's like a early telephone receiver with an armature that moves between electromagnets in there. So
Okay.
it's a complete separate assembly inside the back of the speaker there. And yeah, and the cone itself, there is a front and back, and they both move together, but it's all operated by a telephone style magnet set and moving armature inside, mounted to the frame.
Didn't they have that technology on some really early radios too? That same thing in a regular speaker, supposedly?
Really couldn't tell you for sure on that, but they may have. Oh, one other little item about this speaker itself is in absolutely mint condition, and even the decal down on the front base, Western Electric, is still totally intact. Most of the fuzz on the bottom of the foot is still there. Color matches any new reproductions I've ever seen, but this one did win a ribbon in one of our speaker competitions years ago at ARCI at Radio Fest. But yeah, this one, and it's another reason I keep it out of harm's way, is that this one is in just about mint condition and still actually works. So
yeah, that's beautiful. What, and the material on the front, the cone itself, what is that?
It is paper, and all they say in the booklet for it is a special paper.
Wow.
And I doubt you could try, but I don't think you get a response if you can't mail to the old mailing address to order a replacement one. But back then they offered a complete replacement cone for the speaker. And, this was really still the radio experimenter days.
And it's still intact after 100 years. That's amazing.
95 years that I know of for sure on this one, and still working.
Thanks.
I'm wondering whether that speaker is the basis for this microphone. I've always wondered, picked up this microphone, and it does appear to be on the frame that was used for that speaker. Anybody?
It looks like it. Yeah.
No, it's really not the same.
Yeah, I thought maybe people had ground off a few little parts, but is this for a different speaker? Or do you think it was made as a microphone?
Oh, I think what you've got there is it's probably legit for its time, but the actual element there for the microphone is called double button microphone. It's the construction is different than the Western Electric driver.
Right. There are no springs inside or anything, but some ham radio guy might have taken his old speaking telephone and hung a new mic element in it, used it for a sort of a home built fancy microphone.
Yeah, well, I thought that is a possibility. I've never seen the mic in any catalog, certainly.
Okay.
I'd like to offer that Buford Chidster makes reproduction cones for those type speakers. Those and other ones like the the castle and the ships, and he's based in Pennsylvania.
Oh,
Good to know.
thank you, Dale. Would you mind putting that in the chat window if you could, that information?
I will look it up and put it in the chat.
Thank you very much.
Speakerpeople.com.
There you go. Ed, thank you very much for your presentation. It was fascinating, and we got some good questions as a result, and a lot of good interchange. Appreciate that, everybody. If there's no further questions for Ed, we'll proceed. The last two presentations are about cabinet refinishing. And so we have kind of one topic to close it out today. And our first presenter, Greg Van Beek, prepared a short video earlier in the year when we started talking about the agenda for September. And Greg's here, and I'll introduce him. He can speak a little before we show the video, and then we'll get the video going. Greg?
Okay, well, thank you, Tom. The inspiration for this presentation was very much a spur of the moment thing. I had my cell phone with me when I was going to refinish this cadet radio cabinet, and I decided to shoot a video of each step of the process. So it was a matter of recording, hitting pause, hitting record again, kind of lather, rinse, and repeat. So my apologies for the less than polished editing and the low volume in times, but that said, this is how I tackle cabinet refinishing. So take it with a grain of salt. It's not meant to be the right way or the only way or the way you should do it. It's just what I've found gives me the best results. And if it may give you an idea to try or a different product to use, then it's served its purpose. So I guess Matt will roll the video, and we'll be back in about 14 minutes. Here we have a Cadet Model 66 cabinet, and I've been asked by my friend John to make a video of my techniques on cabinet restoration, cabinet refinishing. And this cabinet isn't going to need a total refinish. I mean, the front, yes, there's some scratches and things, but we can take care of those and make it look decent. My theory on cabinet restoration is try to keep the original finish as much as possible. The top, however, that I'm going to refinish, and I'll be able to mask it off and get it very close to what the original finish was, but there's just too many scratches. So what I do to remove the finish, I use something called a cabinet scraper. Now I don't know if these are still available. They used to have them at Ace Hardware stores. It's just about 1 inch wide, and it has a blade that screws in here, and it's got actually 2 blades. You can flip this around and use each half. But basically you just take and you scrape the old finish off. Not easy to do one-handed because I'm holding the camera here, but and you know, you just gotta hold it straight so you don't dig into it, and it works very good. So I'll pause the video and I'll finish scraping and show you the finished result. Okay, so I finished scraping. Took some fine emery paper, gave it a nice sanding with the grain. I always want to go with the grain. Got it nice and smooth. Now the next step, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some, I think we have goop here, or it's Gojo. I have to look which one's sitting by the sink, but I'll bring the can in here. And I'll take some goop over this area of the original finish, clean it up and see what it looks like. A lot of times the goop itself will fill in some of these scratches. After that, we'll follow it up with some Howards. It is Gojo, and you want to go with the hand cleaner that's the original formula with no pumice. It's actually just a cream. And you take a little dollop in your hand and you wipe it into the wood like this. Get it in there real good. You don't need to go crazy with a big blob of it. A little dab will do you, and you'll see it all start coming off in your hands. And then once you get it thoroughly wiped, you take a clean paper towel and wipe it clean. You can start with a damp one to get the excess off, then go with a dry one. But so we'll do that and show you that result. And you can see how much grime came off of the cabinet just from wiping it down with the Gojo. That's representing about 85, close to 90 years of dirt that this thing accumulated. And you can see it did a pretty nice job of it. Filled in a lot of those scratches and things just from the hand cleaner. Another little tip I do when you have a black trim like this and you have a blemish in it, get yourself a Sharpie marker and color it in. So it's that simple. You really don't need to retone it. Just touch up the spots, and once you put the sanding sealer over it, and eventually your clear coat, you won't even be able to tell you did that. So up next, we're going to get some Howard's Restore Finish and give it a wipe down with that. So Howard's Restore Finish. You can buy this in many different flavors. They have golden oak, they have walnuts, all different wood types. And you can buy this at well, Amazon has it. You can buy it online, or if you have an Ace Hardware store, our local Ace store has this. And a can like this will last you a long time. They're a little bit pricey, probably about 15 bucks, something like that, but it'll last you a long time because you use it sparingly. You don't pour this on. You take some on a paper towel about the size of a silver dollar and wipe it into the wood, and then let it dry, and take a dry cloth and wipe it off again. So I will give you the before and after on that. I take a paper towel like this and I'll fold it in four so you have a little bit of thickness when you dab some on here so it doesn't soak through right away. There, that's looking really nice already, just from the Howards. All those fine scratches you saw, they're all filled in again. And as far as the amount of Howards that I used, this is it. This is it. And it actually
It's not a toner, but it blends in. It takes the old finish and it kind of dissolves it a bit, and you can work it into the scratches and problem areas, and that's what Howard's is known for. And I always try and stay with a lighter shade. That's why I use golden oak, because I don't like darkening the wood any further than it is, because otherwise you get the cabinet's going to look way too dark. And which leads me to my next point. A lot of people, the next step they would do here is put grain filler in. I don't use grain filler. I know that's a cardinal sin with a lot of people, but I found that I never had real good luck with it. Whatever shade of it I would use always made the wood a lot darker than it was, and when I tone it, even with lighter toner, the wood would look way too dark. You'd lose a lot of the grain pattern and things. And so I use sanding sealer. That's the next step. I'll give the whole cabinet a coat of 2 coats of sanding sealer, and I'll show you what that is. And there's 2 kinds of sanding sealer. I always use this Def lacquer sanding sealer. It's just a spray. I think Def got bought out now. I think the new brand is called Prolux. Same thing, just different name. And then I'll set this up and I'll spray it, give it 2 coats. Let the first coat dry and give it a second coat. And I'll show you how we sand it next. And I set myself up a little spray booth here, just some pieces of cardboard I make a little booth out of. And one thing that'll become in handy, and you don't have to get as extravagant as I just made this out of wood, get yourself a Lazy Susan, where you can put your cabinet on and rotate it around when you're spraying it. Grab the cabinet. That way when you spray it, you can hit all the sides without having to touch the wet cabinet. Works great. And always do this in a ventilated area, because this is lacquer and it'll smell pretty bad. But as you can see, this is just 1 coat. You can see that the sanding sealer, it's still wet, but it darkened the top. The top is almost the same shade as the rest of it now. So it won't take a lot of toning to get that to match. And the sanding sealer itself will fill in a lot of those grain pores. Once you sand it afterwards, it won't be anywhere near as rough as if you didn't use any sanding sealer, that's for sure. And all these tips that I'm giving you is just the way I do it. Don't take this as the gospel. This is how you have to do it. There's always more than one way to do things, and this just happens to be the way I do it. And if some of this stuff works for what you do, hey, great. You can also apply this to if you have antique furniture or something that needs refinishing. Some of these same techniques can be used for that. Now, when I get to the sanding portion of it, I get these 3M pads here. They're let's see, they're 4.5 by 5.5 by 3/16 thick. They got sponge. They give, and I'll get one that's a fine, and then I'll get a super fine, and that's what I use to sand the cabinet with. You can get these on Amazon too. Another important thing to use the sanding sealer for is, say on this cabinet that you had to refinish this darker area and you wanted to mask off all this other stuff around it so that you didn't get the rest of it too dark. Well, if you didn't have the sanding sealer on it, any old finish or something, if you put tape just on the bare wood, it's going to leave a mark. It's going to leave tape residue. With the sanding sealer, whenever you mask something off like that, you won't have that problem. It won't take the original finish off. If you have original finish like this that you want to maintain, it won't rip the finish off. And always use the blue painter's tape. That's what I use. And you should be able to do different color toning. You know, this is like an oak, and this is more of a maple, something like that. And as you can see, after the second coat, this is virtually the same color. So I don't even think I'm going to do any toning to that. I'm just going to leave it the way it is. It matches the rest of the cabinet very nicely. And one thing I do have to do, I seen there was 2 little holes that I had filled up. There must have been a metal plate here with a logo on that's long gone, but I have a Cadet decal I'm going to put on there. I got that from Radio Days, from a different Cadet brand radio that I did, and we'll put that on after this. And actually, because the front and the sides were already the original finish, they are nice and smooth already. I don't have to do any sanding on there. You can actually see how shiny it is just with my hand in it. So I just have to sand this with the sanding pads. And another good thing with the sanding sealer on an original finish is once you have it looking decent, it locks it in. You know, it'll preserve that finish that you created with the Howards. And if you didn't do that, eventually it would dry back out again. And you'd have to apply another coat of that. There, and after you sand it with the two different sanding pads, you'll get a white powder that'll come off, and that's what you want. That's what smooths it out and gives you, this is actually very nice and smooth. It's almost like the sides are. And if you look at it, you really can't see any deep grain grooves in it anymore. Sanding sealer did a good job of filling that in. And the white will disappear if you take a paper towel and wipe it off. The white will disappear once you hit it with your clear coat, or if you go with a little toner, it'll also take care of it. And to get rid of dust quickly, if you don't want to fire up your air compressor, just get yourself one of these compressed electronic cleaner air. They usually have them where the computers are, like at Walmart, for cleaning out your keyboards and stuff. It's expensive for a bottle of air, but it comes in handy. Okay, it's time to put the decal on. This little cadet decal, got it from a company called Radio Days. If you search for them on the internet, you'll be able to find decals for just about any radio you have. You always want to put your decal on before you put your clear coat on, so that it blends in. Otherwise, you'll see the outline of the decal all around the area. And you just soak it in the water, let it start to get loose, and carefully slide it on. And there's the decal, all nice and centered over the opening where it should be. Now the next and final step is putting a clear coat on it. And I use this stuff here. It's Ace Hardware brand Premium Clear Finish Gloss Enamel. That's important because it's enamel. Enamel will not attack your decals. If you go over decals with lacquered clear coat, sometimes they'll crinkle up and get real funny looking because the lacquer is actually attacking the decal material. This stuff won't. And you can put enamel over lacquer, just not the other way around. You can't put lacquer over enamel. So there's not a problem with putting this over lacquer toner. So I give it one coat of that and let it dry, and that'll be it. One thing I always do if I have more than one can of the same item, I'll put an X on the cap so I know which one I started using already. And there it is, the finished product. All clear coat, and you can see that the top that we scraped just about perfectly matches the sides. It's a little hard to tell under the fluorescent lights here because it makes it look a little green, but it's not. So that's, in a nutshell, how I finish cabinets.
Thank you, Greg. That was very nice and inspiring. Any questions for Greg?
Thank you, Greg. I'm just wondering whether I missed whether the Gojo should have the pumice in it or not have the pumice in it.
Oh, definitely no pumice, because you don't want to have anything that's going to scratch the wood. The cream is nice and smooth.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question too about the Gojo. There's different kinds, right? Of the Gojo hand cleaner.
Yes.
So the kind you use is original. It's called the original, right?
Original formula, right?
Okay. And doesn't that leave residuals on the wood? Like, did you say you had to use a damp cloth to get any of the residuals off from that?
Exactly. And like I say, you don't use a lot of it. You just put a little dollop in your hand and work it into the wood. And then after you get done, you take it, like I say, a paper towel, and you wipe it off, the excess. Start with a damp one and then go with a dry one. And it shouldn't leave any residue. I would let it dry a little bit before you start putting a sanding sealer on. A lot of times I'll let it dry half a day. And I see Mark just put in the chat for me, I sent him a list of all the products that I used in the video and where you can find them. So check the chat.
Just a couple of comments. Any of those waterless hand cleaners are basically the same stuff. Just make sure it's white, not orange. Because the orange is the stuff with the pumice in it. And the other thing I found on really dirty cabinets, you keep using it until the rag comes up the same color the rag started as. Because you'll find that sometimes in grooves and so on, and I'm sure Greg has found this, that the stuff gets really embedded, and I just keep going over it until I get a clean rag. And then a damp cloth and then a dry cloth and then let it sit for a while is the process I use after I clean it.
Good point. Yep.
All right. Any further questions for Greg? Well, Greg, thanks. We're looking forward to the toning follow-up presentation in the near future. All right. The next presenter is me, so I'll get queued up here. As I mentioned in this presentation, I was actually inspired by Greg's work when he made that video back in early summer, and so I put together this short presentation about some of the things that I use when I do cabinet refinishing, and this is the season I do it, in the late summer, early fall, when it starts to dry out a little bit around here. And I work in the garage and I do my painting outside. And this is my first experience with a multimedia presentation. I embedded some short videos in this presentation throughout, just to kind of show some of the action and be able to look at some of the things I'm talking about. The audio might be a little bit on the low side, so you might want to bump up the volume, but for the most part, the slides will explain what I'm showing in the video. So let me get this going. And that picture on the title slide there is basically a picture of the things I'm going to talk about here. There's a turntable I built and then a cabinet holder. And at the end of the presentation, I'll talk about a few other things that I use. And this all started when I had just seen Greg's video early in the summer. He showed it to me, and I was at this outdoor flea market, and I came across a turntable bearing, and so, you know, the light bulb went on in my head. It's mostly off, but it went on, and I built this. Today I'm going to show you my new painting turntable that I built this summer. I was inspired by Greg Van Beek's video where he showed how he restores cabinets, and he had a really nice turntable in his shop there. And this is the old one I was using, which is a family heirloom belonging to Uncle Fred. I'm going to retire it. No harm done. I had a big piece of cardboard taped to it, so it served its purpose. But this is the one I built, made out of plywood and some particle board kind of floor underlayment and some scrap 2x4s I put together. And in the slides, I'll show kind of how it was put together. You know, Greg mentioned it in his video, but, you know, why do you really want to use a turntable if you're going to be painting a cabinet? Well, you don't want to touch the cabinet, is what he said. And I paint outside, and I always want to keep any breeze that pops up at my back so that the paint goes onto the radio cabinet and not back in my face. And overall, having a turntable just means you're not going to have an accident and accidentally touch the cabinet when the paint is wet. So here's a picture of the bearing, and honestly, I don't know where you buy those other than at flea markets. You know, maybe some of you guys out there can say, "Oh, that's one of those," and you can buy it here. But it's about 5 inches square, and so I made a base out of some old 2x4s and some scrap plywood, and that made it kind of heavy, which was kind of an intent. And once I had the whole pattern in the base, I took it off and made a top and put the bearing, mounted it to the top. And then I captured the bolts into the bearing with some nuts so that I could assemble this thing easily. And so there's the bearing attached to the top, about to be put onto the bottom, and then it was put together. And so here's a little video of show how it spins pretty easy and it can handle a big cabinet.
It's very sturdy. It can accommodate some real big cabinets like this one. Because it's heavy, you can kind of hang the cabinet over the edge. So when you want to paint the edge, you're not hitting the underlayment there and blowing dust up onto the work that you're trying to paint. So having it hang over the edge is kind of important, and it won't tip over because it's so heavy.
So here's a little video of me putting a console on it, which is the work in progress right now. And this video just shows that it can handle something pretty big and heavy. It wobbled a little bit, but it still spins pretty easily. So that first picture I showed you, it showed the holder that I also built as part of this light bulb that went off in my head. And this holder is a nice thing. When you're painting, sometimes you want to be able to paint one surface and you want to optimize the angle to match up with your spray gun. So this thing is very useful for me, and I think it's something that you might find interesting. And it uses a trigger clamp and a camera mount that I found. And again, it's based primarily on this trigger clamp. And this trigger clamp video here shows you how you can take it apart and reverse it.
This trigger clamp is the main element of the cabinet holder. And the trigger clamp, as you squeeze the trigger, the two gray pads come closer together. But if you unscrew this end here, you can take this and you can have it so that the gray pads will spread apart when you squeeze the trigger.
So anyway, this is the basis of the holder, and that in conjunction with this camera mount, which I found at the ARCI swap meet, really are the two things that you need to build this thing. And it says Panavice on it, and I think you can buy these things still, but I took one end off of it and didn't really have to use it. But I went out in the shed and found an old 4x4 with a split in it and some lumber that I had been using to repair my steps. And I put this thing together. And the first try at this was a little bit too tall. It was kind of top heavy, and it just didn't feel right. And you can see the split in the 4x4. Hopefully that won't get any bigger, but I think having that rod in there might help. So I cut it in half, basically, and then the final version was a lot shorter. And it works great. And you can see a couple of different cabinets in there. And here's a video of how you can adjust it without having to touch the cabinet. You just kind of grab the bar, and it also shows you how to put the cabinet on the bar and take it off.
Okay, I wanted to show how you can adjust the angle by just grabbing the bar here and tilting the radio up and down, so you can paint different surfaces more optimally with your spray can or gun or whatever you're using. So if I wanted to paint the top, I would tilt this thing down more like this. And I also wanted to show how simple it is to hook it and unhook it. You basically hit the trigger release and this comes off, and then you can hook it back up simply by doing that.
So there you have it. That's the cabinet holder and the turntable. And then here's finish up this presentation with a few of the tools that I use when I'm working on cabinets. And you know, Greg showed a handheld scraper with a handle on it. And what I use is this, it's also handheld, but it doesn't have a handle. It's just about a 5-inch by say 3-inch piece of steel, and it's called a Baco cabinet scraper. And it's used by cabinet makers to remove finish, but they use it when they get some lumber from the mill and it's got saw marks on it, and they want to remove a little bit of wood. And so it's a very sharp tool that can be used for both removing wood and finish. So if you're careful, you won't take very much wood off at all.
I'm going to demonstrate the use of a cabinet scraper to remove the finish on this big Zenith console. This is a Baco cabinet scraper. It's been recently sharpened. It's important to have a very sharp one, and you have to sharpen it occasionally. And it's important to have a dust mask, and it's also important to secure the cabinet that you're going to scrape to something so it doesn't move, because you put a lot of elbow grease into the work.
And so here's it being used, and it works great on curved surfaces. And after you're done scraping, it usually just takes some 220 sandpaper to get rid of the residual finish that you missed, and the wood's ready to be stained or coated with your lacquer. The good thing about scraping, as opposed to using a chemical means to remove the finish, is that you don't pull out any grain filler that's already in there, and so the finish will be nice and smooth.
Okay, so you saw there that I was flexing scraper as I pushed away from my body. You can also pull it towards your body if the work is secured in this manner, but this cabinet is not secured if I pull it towards my body, but it's easier for me to do it with a curvature. It's also very important after the edges of the cabinet scraper get dull for you to sharpen it. So you'll have to learn how to sharpen it, and we can cover that some other time.
And there's plenty of videos out there on the internet on how to sharpen these types of scrapers. So some additional tools, when I'm going to sand the wood veneer after I scrape it, I'll use one of these 3M Sandblaster Pros, which holds rectangular sheets of sandpaper, and it's a very ergonomically designed tool. It's easy to hold in your hand, and it's a good way to remove stuff off of both flat and curved surfaces and make the veneer nice and smooth. And then additionally, I use this little foam sander. I think it's made by Gator, and it's kind of like the foam sanding pads that Greg was talking about, because when you use it, it doesn't really put a lot of pressure because the foam kind of gives. But I use this for when I'm removing the finish that the scraper didn't get. And the sheets are Velcro back, so you can pull them on and off real easy. And then when I put putty on the cabinet, I'll use this with a 120 grit to help smooth the putty out very quickly. And then Another really important tool that I use, especially on big things that are curved, like that Zenith console, is the pony band clamp. Joe Coaster, in his series of presentations he did for the virtual forum, talked about this, and so I went out and bought one, and it's great and it's indispensable if you're trying to repair veneer on a curved surface. And I'm working on this big Zenith in the garage right now, and it was exposed to the weather on one side, and they must have had it in a garage or something, and a rainstorm hit it. But the veneer is in pretty bad shape, and it's kind of bubbled up in spots. So, you know, and it's on a curved surface. So what do? Well, I've kind of developed a technique that sort of works pretty well, and it works pretty well. I took a piece of brass that's about the width of the band clamp, and I use that to kind of help the band clamp distribute the pressure more evenly. And then what I do is I lay some painter's tape, some frog tape down over the bubbles. And you can see the bubbles there that I've laid the tape over. And then I slit the bubbles with a razor blade that's really sharp at an angle. And then I pry open the slit. And it's important to do it at an angle so that when the slit lays back down, it makes a better joint. If you do it at right angles, then the joint can open up a little bit. And then you take a syringe that you just happen to have laying around the shop, and you fill it with glue, and you inject it in there. And then you clean up the slop from the glue with a rag before you put the brass and the band clamp on. And this, you know, this is a picture of the band clamp and the brass pressing down all along that curved surface, applying nice even pressure. And you got to wait at least 4 hours to let that glue set up, because that's about how long that wood glue takes. And this particular radio, it's pretty tedious. There's a lot of bubbles, but I've been working on it for a few weeks, and it's coming together pretty nicely. And it's pretty much all fixed. You can see where that yellow tape is. There's one of the slits didn't glue down well, and so you can see the slit sticking up, but it's non-bubbled now. So this tool is indispensable for me. And that's all I've got. So keep on restoring. Thanks.
Couple questions, Tom.
Yeah.
Have you tried using a ratchet strap instead of a band clamp?
No, I haven't.
Okay, just because that's what I have laying around. The other thing,
it would probably work pretty well.
Well, the only thing is the hooks would have to be out of the way, whereas the band clamp doesn't have the hook problem. But the second thing is, what do you do to clean out the intricate moldings and so on when you're refinishing them?
I use an abrasive wheel, and I think I showed it in an earlier video, and unfortunately I don't have a picture of it right here, but at Ace Hardware you can buy these, it's like a fiberglass bristle wheel that's got grit embedded in it, and they come in like 3 different grades, you know, and they color code them, you know, the gray and blue and an orange. And it's just a big abrasive wheel. I've seen those with wire sticking out of them, but I don't use those because that just tears up the wood.
Okay, so the bristles are perpendicular to the shaft.
Yeah, it's
like a wire wheel.
Yeah, the shaft goes into this wheel like this, and the wheel goes around and around like this, and the bristles are sticking up radially on the device, and that works pretty well for getting down into the grooves.
All right, thanks.
I'll try to find something like that when we send out the notes. I'll stick that in there.
We stuck a couple of things in the notes about Lazy Susans from Home Depot. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know why Susan is called lazy. I thought that was pretty clever of her to have that device in use.
Well, it's probably a male chauvinistic thing.
That could be. All right, any other questions for me? Well, that concludes our presentation portion of today's virtual forum. And so before we get into the show and tell section, Matt usually puts up a little poll questionnaire to solicit you guys for being presenters. So today was a really good example of how, so many various topics were presented with all kinds of great interchange and ideas and questions. So if you've got something you want to talk about, please be a presenter. And if you need some help making a presentation, Matt and I can help with that. So we welcome presentations, and we hope that you'll be one in the future. So our next segment is the show and tell section. So I know we've got at least one. So we'll just have whoever's ready take the screen.
Okay, I can start. 3 minutes worth, I think. I just noticed that there was a query on Antique Radio forums that asked, what's the rarest transistor device you own? And I answered with these two pictures in this comment. I said, I was thinking I should place something for size reference. Near at hand was a thumb drive. Perfect. One transistor of about 74 years ago next to a device containing billions of transistor junctions at least. And there's room in this thumb drive package to potentially contain trillions of transistor junctions. Yep, proof that some things are just magic these days. This is the Bell Labs Type A of 1949. They may have made some in 1951. They made about 5,000 for professional evaluation by manufacturers and presumably educational institutions. It's supposed to be the earliest limited production transistor device ever made. So that was just a little tidbit there. So I've wanted to demonstrate my 20s vintage radios at Hamfest, antique radio meets, etc., where I did not have access to mains power. I wanted a scheme that was conveniently rechargeable and made use of batteries I already have. I have 20-volt lithium batteries for my power tools. In my case, they're Craftsman tools. The smallest battery is rated at 2 ampere hours and feeds a super cheap 1.5 volt to 30 volt buck boost power supply that will keep 5 or 6 tube filaments like 201As going for 6 or 8 hours. I need a 90 to 135 volt B supply. That comes from another dirt cheap inverter that gets its power from a 5 volt cell phone power bank that costs less than $25. This particular power bank will keep this type of radio playing for 15 hours or more before needing to be recharged. There's nothing worth hearing on AM radio these days, at least where I live. So I have a flea-powered tunable AM transmitter. Tunable because I don't know where I'm going to be and what the interference might show up in the band, in the AM band. So the tunability feature is great. These are available on eBay for 25 bucks. They run off of 4 AA batteries that will keep it going for hundreds of hours. This is my first ABC eliminator. I added other B and C voltage taps for my second unit. So if your vintage radios have battery cables, they're more or less fragile. I suggest you consider adding 4mm banana plugs to protect what's left. Check out eBay. you can find dirt cheap plugs like these. Gold plated My Aunt Fanny. These are crap, but considering how infrequently you will use them, they'll work just fine. So, few people in the general public have ever actually operated 20s vintage radios. This is a great opportunity to let folks operate a regenerative or a 3-dial TRF receiver. It's a great opportunity to have people appreciate the public demand for radios, simple radios, to have single dial tuning and simple volume control. So here's my second ABC eliminator. There's very little wiring in here. High voltage taps are from a string of Zener diodes. Each voltage tap has a low ESR film cap to the B return, and that's it. It's got a lot of banding posts, but you can find them for as low as a buck each on eBay. The high voltage power inverter comes from a company called Taylor Electronics in California. This 1-inch square inverter is amazing and a bit intimidating since it's so small, but there are only 5 wires to connect and 1 programming resistor. So that's all I have here. Any questions?
Yeah, I've got one, Rob. What about the noise from the, what's it, 100 kilohertz?
Yeah, these definitely are switchers. And all I can tell you is these particular switchers are quiet as a mouse on the AM band. I haven't tested them on shortwave to see if there are any birdies up there. And if you're in a very quiet room and you have no modulation on your little transmitter, then you will hear a very soft white noise in the background. And but as soon as you turn on your program content, you won't hear it at all. And so from that standpoint, I've been just delighted with how it works.
If I could just mention, you can quiet down the switcher by putting a toroid in the DC line out of it.
Well, there's not. I know that's a technique. I've used them many times in professional use, but so far, the whisper of white noise in this setup is just been something I could ignore.
I'm wondering if the metal box helps, even though it's not grounded.
Well, it may help, but I've never operated the supply bare naked, so I don't know if it's doing much of a job of containing the radiation or not.
Thanks.
And Robert, is there any reason you didn't use 1 battery and use multiple batteries to?
Well, the one reason is that the little high voltage Taylor Electronics switcher has an absolute voltage limit of 16 volts, and they really suggest that you never use anything more than 13 or 14 volts on it. But the lithium battery that I need to run the filament circuits is taking more current, and the most common batteries now for power tools are 20 volt. So I couldn't go there.
Yeah.
And so that's why I used 2 different supplies.
Thank you.
All right. I'll turn it over to whatever's next.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Robert.
a couple of things. Tom, I've got a couple of things to show.
Okay.
Those of you who have our 1989 vintage radio calendar will recognize this FADA model 260. What I love about it is it has the FADA on the back of it. The back panel isn't just a plain piece. I got some other FADA radios, but at Radio Fest in August, I found this model 272R. And it's the big brother. And it's got the cutout on the back as well. So that adds to the family. It doesn't have to sit on a shelf with its back against the wall. Excuse me. It can be out in an open shelf area. So the other things I picked up at Radio Fest, the forest tube with the metal base, an early one. It's missing a label, but it's for display. And I picked up 3 Brights and Blue tubes out in the parking lot. They're missing the paper label, but
they're still blue.
They're Brights and Blue, and nobody else made them like that. So after having skipped Radio Fest for 5 years, it was good to be back there seeing lots of friends. So that's all I have.
Thanks, Dale. Appreciate that. Any other quick show and tells, Tom?
Yeah, okay, I've got 2 quickies. First of all, I love the talk by Brian, and I just wanted to show a couple of pictures of Phil Weingarten's fake audions, and a little comment that was made by a guy who had bought Phil's stuff. So Phil Weingarten put together these tubes and sold them as originals, as we all are aware, I think. And this is a picture of his tube making laboratory, glass blowing laboratory. And here's another one showing some of the fake audions that he was making in his laboratory. And this, I think, is quite an interesting little piece by the guy who bought Phil's stuff and who had worked with Phil's stuff. I'm just going to go down to the middle here. Mr. Weingarten and I made some spherical audions, which I still have. They're pretty crude, but they work. The bulbs were provided by me from Denko Lamp Company. The filament wires might have been thoriated tungsten. I didn't see any getters. Getting back to Brian's presentation, I sent him some Barex getters, might be borax, I don't know, in a green can. So I just thought that'd be kind of fun. I saw that when I was going through. I think I gave the talk on Phil Weingarten here at one point, didn't I? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, you did.
One other quickie. I was at the MIT flea market, and I saw this military thing sitting there, and I looked at it carefully, and I realized that it opens up in a rather unusual fashion. If you take one of these things here, it goes up, and another thing, it goes up like that, and then you've got this strange looking device and a lot of controls on it, little rolls of wires and stuff, and an antenna that goes up in the air. So you got this device that's designed to sit on the ground and with an antenna sticking up. And I'm thinking to myself, what is that? And then I read the label, and it said, hand emplaced expendable jammer, model like Schlumberger. And it turns out that this is a military jammer designed to jam any nearby radio transmitters. And I did a little more research on it, and I find that these were used and are being used in Afghanistan to jam the signal from a cell phone that is used to detonate an improvised explosive device along a road. So this thing, you carry this thing in your vehicle, and it blocks the cell phone trigger signal for an explosive device that is meant to blow you up. So you never know what you're going to find at the MIT show, but I thought you might enjoy seeing that one. Over and out.
Thanks, Tom. This concludes our virtual forum for today. Thanks, everyone, for coming.